Should have
characteristic.
showed up earlier.
Yeah.
Hello.
Hello. We are live. Very nice. Yay. Hi, Jen. Good morning.
Good morning, Sam. How are you?
Thank you for getting out of bed so early for us because OMG, that's rough. It's 7 a.m. your time, right?
Yeah, that's not that early, I guess, for a Sunday, but
But yeah, it's okay. Actually, let me see. I'm just making sure. So I'm going into Facebook and I'm trying to tag you. I'm just checking that it's actually working. Going live soon. No. Let's make sure this is the first time it didn't actually pop up right away. So let us just get our stuff together here and make sure all is well. Oh, okay. I see an error occurred. Oh, okay. It's the first time that ever happened.
Ooh.
But that's
I'm all about
okay
tech issues.
because it's in line with our topic of today, which is IDAF. Okay, let me just double check this again and then we will tag you. So how you feeling today? How's your weekend been so far?
Can't complain. We might actually get some rain today, which is really exciting for us up
Oh,
here.
this is a good thing, right?
Yes.
Okay, good.
Yes, we are in major drought, so any
Oh,
rain we
really?
yeah.
Okay. Yeah, we did get rain today. Luckily, we had a beautiful day yesterday and we got rain overnight. Everything's a little soggy today, but that's okay because I got my outdoor time yesterday. I got it in. Me and the husband went for a hike, which was very uncharacteristic of him. He did it for me. And I think he might have actually liked it. You can't like say it to him though. Like,
No.
like you just like, oh, it was good. Thank you for joining me. And you just anyway, so we have an amazing guest with us this morning. I just like to give people like a couple minutes to like hop on, obviously, too. But I just want to thank you for joining us, not only so early, but just I'm looking forward to this conversation a lot. Jennifer Dragonette is here with us, and she is the host of Feed Your Body with Love podcast. And she's going to tell you about all the other wonderful things that she has going on as well. But I just want to say, thank you for joining us. And yeah, so tell us a little bit about you. I would love, I always just like to start with that, right? Like I want to know all the goods. I want to know where you're from, what you were up to before this, why you're doing this now, because there's always like inevitably like a before and after, right? So, and the why. Like why is all this sort of unfolding for you, that you're passionate about self-love and like showing up so like imperfectly like as yourself. I love your message. So tell us about that.
So I'm in Northern California, right above San Francisco, which I tried to leave once. I admit I made it to Arizona for 11 months and said, nope, this is not for me. Came right back. So I am kind of a homegrown, like San Francisco Bay Area girl. Oh, my story. Oh my goodness. Like, I don't even know where to start. So I was in finance for 16. Okay. I'm just going to say 16 years because that sounds better than possibly the real number. And there was a point where I was getting sick all the time. It was hard to show up to work. I had a pretty abusive work situation, which was making it even worse. And I finally was like, they did ask me to leave with a settlement check. That was how bad it got, which inspired me to say, hey, I'm not going back to working for someone else. So it was a blessing and a curse to be in that situation that I had allowed myself to be in for so long. And then I started my journey of like, okay, now what do I want to do? When I was 3, I was doing Reiki and energy healing on my grandpa. So I knew there was something connected to source energy, to something higher, something bigger than sitting there crunching numbers, black and white. I'm not a black and white kind of girl. Like I'm analytical, but I'm more of like, let's throw paint on the wall. Let's just do something fun and creative. So I started in health coaching. And I didn't like how we're not going to be like, we're not going to make this all PC and like pretty. So trigger warning.
Go
I
for it.
I didn't like how everyone was so focused on changing their body, regardless of what happened inside your body. So we want to fit in these boxes. I wanted to fit in the box. I went on my first diet when I was like 6 or 7 years old because we put so much focus on what our body looks like that we forget about, like, hey, body, how you feeling? Like, when I was at goal weight, we'll just call it that, where I was weekly checking in at meetings and getting on scales, I was also really depressed. I was praying, and this will be a little deep, but I was praying that I wouldn't wake up in the morning. And every morning when I woke up, I was pissed. I was pissed at God at that time. And I was, like, why? Why are you making me go through these? So we'll fast forward through that because that's a pretty dark story. We don't want to go down that story. It's too early on a Sunday for that. But I realized there needed to be a change. So right before, like, beginning of 2020, I had just gone to a retreat in Sedona, and I was like, no, I'm going to embrace every single piece of my body. It was the first time I gave up dieting. And it was the first time I started saying, okay, it's okay to not be in people's boxes. And I just leaned in, and I leaned in, and I leaned in, and my spunk came back, and everything started to change at that moment. So that's kind of what led me up to where I am in February. I was like, oh, I want to be a podcaster. That same day I started my podcast. Most people do all the research and all those things. I just picked a random host and decided I'm going to interview people about self-love, and Feed Your Body with Love was born. A few months, 6 months later, we ranked number 52 on the top self-love podcast to listen to in 2020, which was, I have still to this day have no idea how we ended up on that list, but I know I have something powerful with that podcast, which then people wanted me to start teaching them to podcast. So Perfectly Imperfect Podcasting was born. And then the brand of the Perfectly Imperfect Entrepreneur, because it's more fun to be imperfect.
Oh, that's 100% right there. It is so fun. It is a little shaky and a little scary at first, but once you really get into the groove of it and you release perfect, I mean, and not that it isn't going to not that it isn't going to come back and slap you in the face every couple days, or even maybe once a day.
Yeah.
Those little nudges from outside sources coming to creep you in. Those little triggers, honestly.
Yeah.
Even just scrolling social media. You're going to get these triggers that are going to be like, "Oh, I need to I need to check that box, or I need to fit into that box." So, yeah, I think that that's a really amazing point of just once you get beyond that, and you can kind of step back and notice when it's happening, and then just get back to yourself, whatever that is, be it messy, be it scattered, be it disorganized, be it big, be it small, be it loud, be it quiet, whatever, I think that that's so important to note, is that once you embrace it, man, life becomes a lot more fun. I mean, there's a lot that happens, right? But so we'll get to that. But yeah, you hit home for me with your story, because I had a very similar experience. I was let go from my career, 10 plus career in publishing, when I was 8 months pregnant with my daughter, with my first child. And yeah, it was a blessing in disguise, I can say now. I know at the time that many people were like, "Oh, but isn't that so nice? Because now you're going to be home with your baby." And it's like, I could have quit, would have been the optimal way for me to be home with my baby, not for me to abruptly be let go and have no frame of reference for how to deal with managing life as not a professional, not a businesswoman anymore, at the same time as adjusting to becoming a mother for the first time. But now, in retrospect, and that's why I asked this question to start for every episode. I always want to know, what happened? Because there's always a transformational moment. And that's when we become, so those are the challenges that allow us to learn so much. And I know a lot of people get get faced with these challenges and they can melt. They lean into the difficulty and the victimhood of the challenge instead of leaning into the growth opportunity of the challenge. So I like to note that, because it's just like, and so it's easier said than done sometimes, but you know just acknowledging you for having that opportunity to step back, really look at what was going on and say, I'm not going back to that. Why would I go back to that? And that leads into like that self-awareness that you talked about how does not how do I look, or what everybody's thinking about me? How do I feel? So becoming aware of those sensations inside of you, whether it's mentally, spiritually, physically, what is going on, really becoming mindful of that stuff so that you can make better decisions. I talk a lot about, everybody hears, all the buzzwords, right? Like everybody hears about mindfulness and then they're like, oh, okay, cool, and, I have the benefit as a teacher in this stuff to see both sides of that. And just like the type of person that I am, like I have that ability to see the gray area. I see the very, concrete, juicy, amazing truth and spiritual based definition of mindfulness. But then we can throw that stuff out the window, and I'll just give it to you like this. Like, mindfulness is being able to note when you feel like shit.
100%.
Like when you're being abused, and it could be in a subtle way that you might not really grab. So just noting that you were able to become aware in the face of challenge, and that's how we grow from those learning experiences, and that's how we can become teachers. So that's why me and you do what we do now.
Yeah.
And it's important to note that. But so leading into our topic, what's coming up for me right now is like, does society, or does our culture, or does our government, dare I say it, or whatever it might be, and does industry want us to be able to face these challenges with poise and with mindfulness so that we can grow? Or do they want us to fear? Do they want our reaction to be fear? And that's what I think this sort of letting go of expectations and like the parameters and programming that's set up for us, this discussion really does come down to, is like, you feel expectations. And we can talk, there's so many different varying levels of this, but that's what's coming up for me right now, is just like, what do you do when you're faced with this? Do you look at it as an opportunity for growth? And do you start to fear because you're wondering what people will think? Like, for example, you lost your job, things are crumbling. Don't look anything like they did, the day before. Your life looks like a mess now. Are you worried what people are thinking of you? Or is this an opportunity? Right? So they really want you to care what people think about you, because then you're going to go buy a whole bunch of shit and you're going to self-medicate,
Oh yeah.
and you're going to get sick.
Yep.
And then when you get sick, we go down that road. So just noting that, because that's what's coming up for me right now. Because you talked about being sick,
Yeah.
and I appreciate you sharing that with us. What do you feel like is, so that's what came up for me out of this conversation, just to start. But what do you think is like the biggest factor in people's sort of attachment to fulfilling the expectations of others or society, right?
Well, honestly, from day one, we're brought up on fear. Like
Yeah.
fear is, there's that whole, it's the best way to control other people.
Yeah.
Is to instill fear. And it's not, I'm not a parent, so I have no idea what it's like. But like when you go to touch the oven when you're little, and I can remember a moment, no, 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 don't do that, you're gonna get hurt. And then I remember a lot, like I don't have a lot of memories from my really young self, but a lot of them are, no, 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 don't do that, you will get hurt.
Yeah.
No, 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 don't do that. As well as like the first time that, I was in class, we were, drawing out our alphabet, and a little boy called me a fatty. Like, why is that the only memory I have of kindergarten.
Yeah.
There's this fear of like, I didn't fit in. We want to fit in. We're social beings. We want to be accepted. We don't want to
Yeah.
be the outcasts. It doesn't feel good to be on the outside of something. So there's always a fear of like, I want people in my life. I want friends. I want to fit in. And I think that fear comes up from childhood, and it amplifies as it gets older. And I am so grateful that I did not grow up with social media. I am so grateful that like computers and tech and phone and all of that happened like either like almost like the end of my high school well,
Yeah.
yeah, I was pretty much out of high school. So
You're like,
I'm like, oh, dating myself. But that's okay because I'm
uh,
embracing that, like, hey, I did go through that time. And oh my goodness, not having someone having to constantly film. I
mhm.
just I see the difference in generation. I am like everybody's kid's aunt. I am Auntie Jen for everyone. Which my friends and family love because it's like, oh, but I see it really heavily come up now.
Yeah.
Everybody wants to be on social media. Everybody's constantly like, on their phone. Like we're so under a microscope now that fear of fitting in makes us lose touch with ourselves.
Yeah.
And the filters and all of the different things. It's like, okay, when you're looking online, almost everybody's going to have a filter.
Yeah.
Whether it's a funny filter because and a lot of that bubbles up from self-worth and how you feel about yourself. So there's so much.
Yeah.
There's so much around fear because then it's like, okay, well, what happens when someone in reality meets you walking down the street? Are they going to judge me because I don't have a filter on?
Yeah.
I can't wear a filter in my everyday life.
Yeah.
And it's just we constantly replay things and it's a vicious circle. And fear is right now we're like we were just talking about living in fear and of germs and like all the different things. There's
Right.
a whole new level of fear being put, distilled in us. What, granted, that's what's happening right now in the world. But fear is a great way to to create control. Like, we ran out of toilet paper last year. Come on.
Yeah.
That was fear-based because we
Yeah.
all, like a case of Costco toilet paper
Yeah.
wasn't
I'd
going to
love to
last us.
know like how many people actually like couldn't what like couldn't wipe their number 2. Like, you know what I mean? Like, I would love to know the numbers on that, like all of that fear and how many people really, really got into a situation where you were like effed in that area. But it's like, it's a silly example, but it's a good one because it's like all of that commotion
Mhm.
and what it does to our nervous system. I mean, it's hard because it's like, oh God, then we can go down into a whole new rabbit hole there trying to keep us trying to
Yeah.
keep us in line. But yeah, man, it's like it really so that awareness, I actually that's what I wrote down is like um you mentioned that it's not only is it programmed for us to want to fit into these categories, but there's also a natural biological urge to do so. So I think that that's really important to note because at least for my journey and I really don't and so I have to assume that it isn't just me. Um once I kind of became really hyper aware of this stuff, I then for a little while lived in a space of a little bit of self-shaming. Like, why do I give a fuck so much? And
Yeah.
kind of like then you're like putting it on yourself and like all of that. And so it's like, okay, it's a blame game. You either put it on yourself, why do I care so much? What's wrong with me? Or you can turn it, a lot of people and it's healthy to at least be in these spaces for a moment maybe, but just become aware and then move beyond it of like, you can point the finger at your parents and your grandparents and how they raised you. So there's a lot of blame that can come in, but I think that's why it's important to note that there is a natural biological urge to want to fit in. That when you think about it, that is also programming, but it is from a so far back ingrained way, because if we didn't, at a certain point, I'm pretty sure, like if you were the one, maybe like the first caveman that was like, look, fire, they probably like fucking killed him. And then it was like the second or the third guy that they were like, oh, okay.
Right.
I mean, seriously, like, because that is, you're stepping out of the norm. And so when you think about it, it has to be this sort of biological, natural, urge. So I just invite people to, absorb that a little bit, because there's nothing wrong with you for caring
Yeah.
what other people think and what society's expectations are. We're literally biologically and um sort of nurture based programmed to care just the end, so it's like, okay, parental, sort of epigenetics approach, plus biological, plus all your media and your culture just coming in and reinforcing all of it over and over and over again. So it's really, I think it's important to like name the culprit. I'm always talking about that, like, name your offender,
Yeah.
because it is the only way that you can really become aware of this stuff. But you also said something a little bit before that about not living in black and white. Like, it's not black and white. So like, and that's a good example of it. It's like, it's not just like, oh, what's wrong with me? Like, there's so much there that sometimes it's like not even worth unpacking it to that kind of level. It's just about committing to coming back to yourself. Um, and I think that self-care, certain forms of self-care are, if, dare I say it, any kind of friggin' self-care might actually have it, either a small or extremely large effect on your ability to do that.
Yeah.
Because I think the first thing that happens when you start to prioritize yourself, whether it is from a wellness perspective or whether it is just from like I am going to, I mean, all of it really is a part of wellness. But, like I'm going to sing, or I'm going to do art, or I'm going to, have whatever that thing is that I've always really kind of felt drawn to, that I've been like told is silly or not normal or
Yeah.
whatever it is. I'm going to do that friggin' thing
Yeah.
and see how it feels. Again, coming back to that, space of like, what makes me feel like shit and what makes me feel good. Bottom line. There is some gray area to that too, but yeah, not living in the black and white of what's right and what's wrong, and being okay to step into that gray area. And that's a messy area. I think one of the things, yeah, and I think that's where it came up for you, was like being told that things have to be one way or the other. And I always go back to like one of my first like really long-term relationships, which was like this totally like mentally abusive relationship, where like I was, talk about programming and like control and fear-based, right? Like I was totally controlled by this person.
Yeah.
And I was much younger than he was, and I was vulnerable in that way, and I believed a lot of the things that he said to me. And one of the things he used to say to me all the time was that my view, like me being able to see the duality in things, because we would have these conversations, or like, about an argument in the family or whatever it was, somebody did this and they shouldn't have done that, or whatever it was. And I was always able to see this duality of the situation based on what the person's intentions were, and see, okay, well, yeah, that sucks. But, and you see the gray area, you see like, all right, but I can understand how this might have happened and how we can move beyond it. And I remember him just constantly telling me like that was wrong. That was a completely false and wrong way to approach any situation, that it isn't intention based. And there's literally, would say, right? There's no in between. So as soon as you make those compartments or those boxes, now we have to live in one or the other. And the minute that we don't feel like we fit in, we start to beat ourselves up and we start to feel wrong. And we go down this line, and now we feel judged, or we're in fear of judgment of stepping outside of those bounds. So I think the gray area is like a really important piece for this.
It's where all the healing happens too.
Yes. Oh, it's so
Let's just
true.
call a spade. That's where the healing happens, is once
Yeah.
you can get out of those boxes where you feel like you're just treading mud. We're not even treading water at this point. We're treading mud. And it's uncomfortable and it's hard, but that's where the magic is that ability to get out of the, like you said, the slump of like, oh my goodness, why am I thinking this? I have so much shame for thinking this, versus the I'm trying to fit in the box. So you have those two black and white sides, but that middle point ground, it's hard. And it's hard in
Yeah.
any time you change anything, whether that's, the way you feel about yourself, the way that you're eating, the way
Right.
that you're interacting, like you said, with a significant other.
Yeah.
That moment that you realize, like, oh, this is actually abusive. Now what do I do? Because now everything's attached. And I've had relationships like that, and it was like, oh, now I'm attached. Okay, this household is taking two incomes. I only have one income worth of finances coming in. How do I leave this?
Mm.
And there's all of those things, but it's when you start trudging that muddy water, eventually it gets easier. You
Yeah.
just gotta go in and start working the mud.
Yeah, that's what I always say too, especially when I'm talking to people about like where to begin to prioritize themselves. I'm always just like jump in anywhere. Like literally anywhere, because it will send a message to your mind, body, and soul no matter what it is you're doing for you. It will send a message to your mind, body, and soul that you are a priority and that you're loved and that you're worthy. And then things become clear based on that,
Yeah.
not based on the I mean, yeah, sort of in line with this conversation, the draw or the urge to choose perfectly, to
Mhm.
to execute perfectly. Like that's the conversation I have time and time again about like executing self-care purpose perfectly. And it's like, no, no, no.
Mhm.
That's the opposite of what we're trying to cultivate here. It's just like jump in, dude. And that's like so yeah, if there was somebody listening right now was wondering like, well, how do I, just embrace my imperfect self? That's probably what I would say is just jump into something that you love or something that you know is going to make you feel good or better imperfectly with, just without a plan, without perfect action, without execution being scheduled, and, be spontaneous, just jump into something. So I guess that's a good question. Like, what would you say if somebody was listening now and going, what's the best way that I can start to just let go of this fear of judgment and fitting in and start coming back to my authentic self?
So my favorite is art. I love art because first off, you don't have to share it.
Yeah.
Last
Mm.
year, I really leaned into this whole creating art with your eyes closed, because you'd be surprised what you can see when you don't actually see. And once you can start to dissociate like this need, again, it's the need to be perfect. And you're like, okay, think of how you're feeling, set a whole bunch of pens out or paints out, just close your eyes and feel into that and grab things and just put it on the page. Um, because at that point it's something safe. It is something so incredibly small that no one's going to judge you except for yourself, and you will be absolutely surprised how little you end up judging yourself.
Yeah.
And it's not about, like, for me, if you're really in the dark space,
Yeah.
the big steps are scary and can go the opposite way. If you're a person that can be all in and that's great, that's go for it, jump in.
Right.
But if you need something very small to just start pushing yourself forward, you can use something like art. Yeah, we judge art all the time, but look at how many abstract painters are selling
Right.
masterpieces for multi-million dollars, and you're like, did you literally just like throw paint at a wall at a canvas? All right, that's worth millions because they believed it was worth millions.
Yeah.
So I think that art, it kind of unlocks that like creative flow where you can start getting back into yourself. It's a great form of meditation.
Yeah.
Sometimes journaling might be even too hard. So it's
Yeah.
a great way to get out without having to see what you're getting out. And then if you want to create it and turn it into something else, Maybe when you're drawing things, you see something and it looks like a dragonfly. You're like, oh, I'm going to add these few little lines and look at this, look what I've created. And then for me, I would go deeper and be like, oh, what's the meaning of a dragonfly?
Right.
Like, let's be honest,
Exactly.
it can be a long process because it'll be like, oh, well, I drew a bunch of circles. What does that mean? And you
Yeah.
might research what circles mean and like, oh, maybe I feel like I'm stuck in a pattern.
Yeah.
Or
It's
maybe this is
really,
unity. So
oh,
it's a great tool. That's probably the best thing that I can, depending on how deep in you are,
right.
And disconnected with self, art is a great way to just let go.
I am so glad you said that because I'm like this. I mean, art for me is important as well because I sing and I write music. So, and I've always done that. And I mean, that's probably the biggest, um, probably one of the biggest, sticking points or like stories about this topic for me in my personal life. Cause it's like, I spent so long, um, being programmed and listening to what I was told as a child, which was that singing was not a good option for me to pursue because it was so, unlikely that I would be successful in quotes, right?
Mhm.
Um, that it would be such a struggle that I should just, it was silly to even consider that as, meanwhile, here I am, what was I, 8 years old? I didn't tell you that I was going to be the next Celine Dion. I didn't say that I needed to do this as a profession. I'm here 8 years old and I'm telling you that I love to sing and that I don't want to wait until everybody leaves the house to move the couches out of the way in the living room and start a whole production. I want to do it when everybody's in the house. So it was like, so I look at that and I can see, I have very blurred memories of childhood because of Lord knows why, but that is like a very clear very clear memory for me because it was a pivotal moment where unfortunately I felt squashed, I felt judged, and I felt silly, and like I was stepping outside of the norm. So I put that draw toward music on the shelf for 20 years. And not until my mid late 20s did I come back to it. And even then, I was, definitely it's just a good example because I was trying to emanate all these other singers. So now it's like, all right, cool. Like I'm going to do this, but now I'm comparing myself to everybody else. And it was only through doing it over and over again and and probably alongside my own healing that I was able to and I noticed that even through yoga. It was probably around the time that I went through yoga teacher training that I was like, "Oh my god, like I sound different." And not only is it probably because my lung capacity is probably a little better, like all the breathing and stuff, but I sound different because I sound like me. So that's an example of like other forms of self-care coming in and like kind of just like filling me up and making me feel like me again. So I'm promoting my wellness so that all these other things can fall into place. Now, I love that you brought up art instead of journaling because journaling is another thing that's like very important to me and that I'm always preaching as such a beautiful like therapeutic form of self-care. But a lot of people do struggle with that and they're like,
Mhm.
"Hell no." Even though I'm like, "No, no, no, just brain dump. Just brain it doesn't have to." But it's literally there's a blockage with that pen because you want it to be pretty. You want it to come out perfect. I still struggle with it too, where I'll like be, and then I'm like, what the hell am I doing? Like, just keep going. Like,
Yeah.
stop, and I have to, turn that switch off sometimes, and that's okay. But it's like, I get it. So I love that. Not only just like throwing something out there as far as whether it's painting, drawing, whatever, but doing it with your eyes closed. It's like, wow. And then even maybe even the process of looking at it and finding meaning. What message am I trying to send to myself? It's like that's like intuition boot camp.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
So
So,
that word, another word that, our listeners may or may not have heard, but probably, it's like your intuition, your inner knowing,
yeah.
that space where you live, that space inside, your gut feeling that you are also told and programmed not to listen to.
Yeah.
Sadly, you are
Yeah.
literally told, "Oh, you got a gut feeling? Great. Do what the book says to do.
Right. Yeah.
Don't do what your gut tells you to do. Do what the book tells you to do." Now, granted, you follow what your gut tells you to do. Yeah, could it be a disaster?
No.
Sure. I think it's less likely than you think and feel it will be a disaster, but it might be. And you know what? That disaster was sent to you. This is, here I am. I'll get on my soapbox for the next 20 seconds. It was sent, that disaster was there for, especially if you were following your intuition, that disaster was sent to you for your opportunity to learn.
Yeah.
And, so now we're going down that road now. But it's the idea that we are literally told that just doing things based on that inner knowing, that gut feeling, that those answers that are already within us, that are literally just like bing, they're
Yeah.
there, and then you're like, shh, shh, shh. We're literally programmed not to listen to it.
Yeah.
It's like craziness.
So for me, art really opened it up. The first time I did the exercise, I did it with crayons, and I was trying to tap into something because sometimes like where the sticky point is. So I was just thinking about it. So I was thinking about it with my eyes closed, reached out. I was like, okay, spirituality, because I had a hard time with spirituality and sharing that because I was made fun of a lot for all of my beliefs as a child.
Yeah.
I picked up a white crayon on a white piece of paper and drew an entire picture. Like at that moment, I was like,
Get the black light.
what's going, because it was something. And to me, when you look at that, you can kind of start processing things out without having to write like, in my childhood, this came up and this came up, and have to keep, again, what are we doing? We're writing that story and ingraining that. Because again, pen to paper helps that brain connection. But when I started drawing a picture, I was like, I'm not seen. I'm not heard. I'm hiding. And it was like at that moment I knew that, like, okay, art's my thing.
Yeah. That's so big. That's so meaningful. And it's like, so, what's coming up for me now is like, you know, the literally the voices that would be in my head if I did that would be like, "Stop, Sam. That doesn't mean that. That doesn't mean anything." You know what I mean? Like, why
Yeah.
are you But so that's why it's so important, because if that's what the first thing that comes up for you, that's the inner knowing. It's the first voice that you hear. The second voice is your wounded inner child. The
Yep.
second voice is that little inner child that got judged and and started to contort and change to fit in and for acceptance and for love. That wounded inner child is like, shut up. You don't know what you're talking about. You're just, you're being woo, or whatever. No, that's what came up first. It's beautiful. That was your answer. Boom.
Yeah.
That's your answer. This is what this means. Um, it's a download. It's just true as anything you've ever read in a book, if not more true, because it came from you. Ooh, there you go. My first rhyme of the day. um, so you mentioned, there's two things I want to hit on. You mentioned spirituality. So, and we're literally on this because you're like talking about, connecting to yourself here. So, and I always talk about, obviously the difference between religion and spirituality, the difference between what your form of spirituality is. It's, connection to self, but also connection to something bigger.
Yeah.
So, something bigger there would be like, there is a message that is coming to me from wherever you feel like, defining it to come from, whether it's energy, whether it's universe, whether it's source, whether it's God, whatever the hell, right?
Yeah.
That is somebody, but yes, I can relate to, um, yeah, by way of that exact example of like those sort of messages that I was quieting in my life for so long. But also, like, I'm an empath and I'm a highly sensitive person, and I can understand, like, and that's why I live in that gray area that we talked about. And it would friggin' infuriate people. It wasn't just that ex that I mentioned. it would infuriate people, or it would confuse people, or it would just put people off very often. So so you get those reactions enough, and then you start to dull yourself.
Mhm.
And that's what I did. And a lot, even further than that, I think when I was younger, I would actually, I mean, obviously, I'm here for a reason. I talk a lot. And that was always one piece, right? Sam, you're yapping. Shush. So we're supposed to, especially as women, right? We're supposed to be quiet and small and manageable, right? So there was all the talking, but even the talking was, even at a very young age, very philosophical,
Yeah.
very spiritual discussion. And I remember, like, my aunt used to be like, "What are you like? What are you, like, a million years old? Like, you know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
what is this? What is this 6-year-old talking to me about right now?" Um, but and it became, were endearing moments regarding it like that, but then there was also a lot of joking about it, right? And it became a joke.
Yeah.
So when it becomes a joke, then same thing. You start to contort, change yourself, because now who wants to be the butt of a joke, right? So I'm just putting that out there as my story for the people who could resonate, because again, I'm 100% sure I'm not the only one who's experienced something along those lines. But having, over the last couple of years, come to a place where not only am I on a healing journey, working with coaches, working with therapists, but like allowing myself to come out, like, imperfectly, as we're talking about, and just show up here in this space live and just be like, this is who I am. And the more I let myself do that, the more my spirituality comes out
Yeah.
now. And to the point where, like, who knows whether my title is going to remain self-care coach. Like, you know what I mean? Like, I don't know that, I'm going to let this flourish until, like, one day you might see Sam, spiritual guide. I don't know. But it's like, oh, like, these are the pieces of me. This is a massive part of myself
Yeah.
that I did not, because every time I talked about this stuff, it was like, whoa, 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 whoa. And yeah, and I can go down that road, but it sounded like you had a similar experience with that when you mentioned it.
Right. Oh yeah. I mean, since like I said, I was energy healing on my grandpa when I was 3. That's pretty good connection to whatever my higher power of whatever I believed in, at that time. And like you said, one thing I want to hit on is, like, your higher power can be whatever you want it to be. You just know there is a higher power,
Yeah.
whether that's in religion or woo or the combination of both. It's that connection that you have to something outside, that energy outside of you. We're all energetic beings.
Mhm.
That all that energy that you have isn't sourced just inside yourself. And, I was told, "You're an old soul." Okay, you're calling me old. I'm 5 and you're saying I'm an old soul? What does that mean? I had
Yeah.
no idea what it meant. But it was because I was wise beyond my years, and I was wise beyond my years in that spirituality, that as I got older and got shut down, and again, the butt of the jokes, I hit it.
Mhm.
And I love that you mentioned, like, in who knows what my title will be. I'm the pivoting queen. I love the last 3 years have been pivoting as I've been leaning in deeper, as you get to know yourself. Like, you are not stuck with whatever, especially in business. Like, if you have your own business, you are not stuck doing it forever. Even if it's a cash cow, it's okay to pivot, because the more in flow you are, the more that give take is going to happen, and it gets easier. And that's one of the things, like, if I could offer any advice, is, like, if it's a huge struggle and you're forcing yourself to still do the same thing, see if there's a little tweak that makes it a little bit easier. Even
Mhm.
if it seems like, "Oh my goodness, this is too easy." It's not gonna be that easy for someone else that was in your shoes 2 days ago. You could be that much further ahead of somebody and still help them.
Yeah.
And it's okay to change your mind. Like, judge away. I mean, you've been in my space for a while now. You've seen quite a few different versions of, like, I'm a body positive coach, I'm an intuitive eating coach, I'm a podcasting coach, I'm a goddess coach. Like,
Yep.
it's been shifting, and that's okay.
Yeah. I love that. I literally, I mean, full disclosure, I'm here for the vulnerable shares. Uh Literally just had this conversation with my therapist, like 2 days ago, where I was like, I'm feeling so much resistance around pivoting, around around labeling, my labeling, and so not to go too far down that road, but it's like, just to note that, it's okay to feel discomfort in that need to change and to pivot. Obviously, there is going to be discomfort in any mode of change. And it's also okay to sit with it for a while. I always say, like, the answers, I think one of probably two of the most, like, you know, sort of eye-opening moments when I fully embodied these facts was like, A, the answers are either inside of you already or on their way to you.
Yep.
So, like, talking about trying to be perfect and trying to, you know, fill all the boxes, I often would give myself a ton of anxiety and would experience a ton of anxiety around making decisions right away and knowing the answers now.
Yeah.
And so I was that person who would be like, I'm going on Google and I'm calling my sister and we can go down that road too, like all the validation
Yeah.
instead of just going inside because I needed the answers now. So that for me was just like, I can release that because it's like, what's the worst thing that can happen? And what am I fearful of? I'm fearful of people thinking that I don't have the answers or that I'm scattered or I'm disorganized or like I, am not smart, or whatever it is. It's like all fear-based, and it detaches you from your ability to connect with the idea that everything's going to be okay. And even if you are a mess, everything can still very well be okay. It might even be better, and more fun, as we said.
Way
But
more fun.
but also if you just give yourself that space
Yeah.
to wait it out. So that's what I'm saying. Like if you feel like, oh, you know, I want to start a business or I want to start a podcast or whatever it is, and you're like, but what do I even call it? And what do I even call myself? And what does that make me? And like what do I have to portray? And all of those questions, it's like, here's your invitation to just sit with it. Just wait. It'll come to you. It'll be like this little spontaneous like inner nudge. Just wait for it. And I think the other thing that was like so pivotal for me was like, again, just like releasing the idea of perfect in general. Releasing it. I think one of the first things that I worked on with my first coach that I ever worked with was fear of imperfect action. And it was like the first time I ever heard anybody say that. And so then you're able to become aware. Oh yeah. So like not only am I, of course, fearful of the outcome being imperfect and being judged. And so when I say judged, like fearful of what people think,
Yeah.
will think if you fail, right? Or if your outcome is a mess or a disaster or, anywhere in between, right? Um, but so not only fearful of that, but even fearful of executing imperfectly. Talk
Mhm.
about holding yourself back,
Oh yeah.
you know? So, like I said, it was the first time that I ever really like even heard it put that way. And as soon as I heard those words, I'm like, that's it. That's where I'm at. You got me. But it's just becoming aware of that is like half the battle because you're like, I am doing this. Oh my God. And why? Why? So, and do I have this like booming coaching business now? No. Am I, having having 5-figure months? No. But I find success is a fluid term and it should be different for everybody. And for me, I get a message at minimum every other day about this podcast or something else I'm doing that's from someone telling me that I'm helping them and that they're enjoying it and they're gleaning from it and that it's helping or whatever it is, right? Positive feedback is telling me that I'm in line with my purpose right now That is success for me right now. So again, I invite people listening to define their own level of their own version of success, because that's the thing. You're fearful of not succeeding,
Yeah.
and it's like, so that's where we need to begin sometimes. Yeah.
And sometimes it's letting go of the labels too. Like you were afraid, like one of the things that keeps coming up for me, because you mentioned like your first coach. My first coach, I was handed a business card, and you want to know what her title was? Queen of Mer Pirates. That's what was actually on her. She was a business coach, but her title was Queen of Mer
I
Pirates. And
love
I'm
that.
like,
And because she's
okay,
like, whatever.
every time I pivot, it doesn't matter if I'm going to help you with this, or this. She's like, I'm a mer pilot. I'm the queen of mer pirates. And it was like, she was like, now that I look back, having the last 3 years, she was probably one of the pivotal moments for me when I started stepping into myself, because it's like, she just called herself a mer pirate. Like, how
Yeah.
cool is that? And she does have a success. I mean, like, I saw her back end of her business. I knew her as a person. I was like, she's got a lot of what I want and define as success.
Yeah.
As a mer pirate, okay, I'm all in.
Yeah. So that's that also, like trusting yourself,
Yeah.
trusting yourself. You feel connected, you feel drawn. I had not the mer pirate thing, but I had a kind of a similar, like the first coach that I ever worked with, like her title at the time was Creative Perspectives Guide or Coach or something like that. And, so in retrospect, yeah, she was probably trying to get creative, which I've, been down that road too, and I tend to try to do that too. And one of the yeah, and she has since pivoted a million times as well. And, she's even in the yoga world now. Like we kind of came
Yeah.
right back to each other. But so yeah, I would. And so actually what's coming up for me in relation to this conversation is the comparing, right? Because the label, like our draw to going into these categories and labels and choosing one for ourselves is to be in the box,
Mhm.
is to step into one of the boxes, have to be in one of the boxes, because it's again innately programmed inside of us to feel like if we don't, then we're wrong and different and not normal and won't be successful, you know? Um, so it's like, yeah, releasing the attachments, that's the yogi in me has to say, detach, non-attachment, releasing the attachment to the labels, releasing the attachment to even the outcome. Like you can act and then see how it goes on the other end and not even have, I mean, do we want a vision? Yes. Do we want a very broad picture vision for our lives and what it is going to look like in our own version of success that we were just talking about? Yes. But are you a fortune teller? Can you see every detail on the other end of this? No. No, I mean, maybe there are people who can see that, but I'm not one of them.
But me either.
Right. So it's like, that is a power that you're insisting on yourself that you should have. That is a pressure that you're putting on yourself that you don't need to have. So, but even further than that, we put ourselves into these boxes. And then I think that that's where comparison comes from.
Mhm.
Because the problem is then it's a game of who fits in the box better. Who is fitting in the box best? That's comparing. That's that comparing that we all do where we're like, oh, well, she's doing it. Why didn't I do it like that? Or she just, she started her business and it's only been a year and she's making six figures. Or look at her little perfect family and look at the outfits and look at the white picket fence and all of that. So all that comparing, that is equals who can fit in these boxes better, best. So if we eliminate the boxes, we eliminate the comparing. And the comparing goes nowhere. The comparing completely stunts you, in fact, because then you're in a negative space, you're in a negative vibration, you are shitting on yourself, quite quite frankly. Why does my life not look like that? What's wrong with me? I am doing, guilting yourself. I'm doing something wrong, shaming yourself. I am wrong. And you are in a negative space. Nothing positive can come out of that. So if we eliminate the boxes, we can eliminate that comparing game. I wish. I know
And it starts
sometimes.
with awareness.
Yes.
Like, you just have to be
Full
aware
circle.
of it.
Yeah.
And it goes back to checking in with yourself. Does this feel like you're an empath? Is this even mine? Like, that's one of my favorite questions. I'm like, is this feeling even mine that I'm having right now? Because I'm nope, not mine. You can have it back.
Right. Where you're like, who, and it's I love when things like kind of have a dual meaning, but the same also, because it's like, yes, as an empath, same thing. Like, I will pick up on vibes and emotions from the people around me and take them on as my own very easily. And I will often be like, what the I was having, like, literally 5 minutes ago, I was having the best day of my life. And now I want to jump out the window. So, like, what's happening? But yes, it's awareness from that perspective to make sure that you're just not, even if you're not, literally absorbing somebody's vibe, are you telling or are you absorbing somebody else's story?
Mhm.
So forget, whether you're an empath, whatever, like, are you absorbing somebody else's story that's based on their quote failures and their, strife and discomfort and challenges and what they gleaned from those and taking it on as your own, which I guess comes back to that intuition piece too, where it's like, throw all that out the window and go within and see how it feels. Because let me tell you something, if you want to go for something and you get those butterflies in your belly when you think about it and you get all like lit the hell up,
Oh yeah.
and then your wounded inner child comes in and says, you don't know what the fuck you're talking about. Or my favorite and probably like that's, mine is, who the hell do you think you are?
Yep.
So when that voice comes in, that's like somebody else's stories that your inner child just like absorbed as truth because it's a child. And so now it's walking around as your inner critic. But yeah, I guess the point is like, yeah, you don't need to hold on to that stuff. Coming right back to our, topic of letting go for this month. Like, you don't need to hold on to that stuff. It 9 times out of 10 it isn't yours. It's based on somebody else's definition of success, somebody else's, a lot of times it is your parents or your grandparents, and it's based on their trauma. It's based on their experiences that might have been really complicated, and those aren't your experiences either. You're like a total, like, pure soul
Yep.
here from the get. So we forget that sometimes. We don't have to cling to it. Um, and we certainly don't have to be like the next person in the box.
No.
Um, I love this conversation. Like, I'm so happy right now that we're doing this. We had a few comments. Jen Collard Forns, who's going to be on the podcast next month, in our motherhood topic, which is coming next
Ooh.
month. We're going to be all about the mamas in May, the whole month of May, all about motherhood and, the struggles and the solutions. um but she just said, I love that caveman fire example you just threw down. Perfect. I'm like, I am going to have to write that one down. I'm like, that is true. Sometimes there'll be a gem that comes out here and there. I got a bunch of gems from you. I jotted them down. But yeah, so what I normally like to do just to wind down the episode is any final thoughts, and feel free to take a beat, take a breath, whatever, like, no pressure, but any final thoughts, things that are coming up for you that were not said. And then of course, aside from art, which we did talk about, like any forms of self-care that are like non-negotiable for you, that you like are always promoting for, whether it's your clients or the people that you love.
So, oh my goodness, there's so many. Well, we'll just start with self-care because that's easier. For me, I have a bunch of non-negotiables. Walking my dog is one of them. It's actually built into my schedule. And if it runs long, that's fine. The other one is, it's really, I mean, it's basic. It's just being aware of yourself. That's one of my favorite, is like being aware and asking yourself and just slowing down enough, put your hands on your heart, feel your heart beating, and ask, is this mine? And you can even ask, is this mine in this present moment? Because it might be yours from yesterday or from 10 years ago, but just ask, like, is this what's coming up? I try to journal. I'm not a good journaler. So the other thing is, it's just, other than art, that's one of my things. I have doodle pads all over my house, because if I'm nervous, if I'm upset, I'm either tapping, because I love EFT tapping, or I am doodling. And allow it. I mean, I could be doodling while I'm talking to you. Like, I don't pay attention, but sometimes there's always a message in your mess. There's always, if you're willing to look at it from a different perspective.
Yeah. That's in line with what I've been saying a lot lately. Like, sometimes self-care is addressing the elephant in the room.
Yeah.
It's definitely, people here have heard me say, it's not bubble baths and pedicures, and so that's been heard, I'm sure, but it could very well be addressing the elephant in the room. And that's where that space of self-awareness has to come into play, because we got to take a step back, slow down, take a look at what's going on. So I love it. You're
And
the best.
play.
What?
And play. Don't forget play. If you can act like a 5-year-old, do it.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree 100%. I had a moment just a couple days ago where I started to tear up because my daughter was like making up a dance, like but with no music. So then we found the music that would go with the dance, and then we were doing it together, and I just started to tear up, not only just because it was like this really cute moment, but the play that was being drawn in, and the just the creativity, um just noting that what goes deeper in those moments is presence.
Yeah.
Like, you are not in those moments where you're having like these playful, like, just silly, like, you know, and these moments are often looked at, by the way, as a waste of time, like what we need to be like doing things and like producing. But those moments, if you can incorporate play, offer a presence practice, which is just like, please, that's how you get to a place of self-awareness, is being comfortable being in the now. So, and all of it is a practice, just like yoga. I always say that too. It's like, okay, if this is triggering you right now, and you're listening and you're like, I am so far away from that, kind of thing. No, you're not, because it's all a practice. Some days I do it and it's like comes fluidly, and I'm like so in it to a point where I would start to cry because I'm like so present. And then there are other days where I'm just not there at all, and I am in that go 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 producing, you know doing mode for an entire day. And it is a practice where it just there's an ebb and flow.
Yeah.
So I don't know, that's when these things come up for me, I make sure to say them, because I just feel like if it's coming up, then somebody might need to hear it.
And if it's a trigger, it's probably something you want to become more aware of. FYI.
Yeah,
Just a little
totally.
little nugget there. Like,
Yeah, that
if you're
word
being
trigger.
triggered by something, like, let's look at why.
Yeah, that's your red flag. That's your little flag, or your white flag, depending on the situation, right?
Yep.
It's like, that's the moment where you're like, okay, that's the elephant in the room. Let's get to that. Oh my God. Oh my God. This has been so amazing. Thank you so much, Jem. Appreciate
Thank
your
you.
time. Appreciate you waking up and joining us so early in your day. Just real quick, tell us where to find you online, and I'll make sure to put that in the show notes as well.
I'm pretty much everywhere, and the handle is always j.dragonette. Just made it easy. That way, when I pivot multiple times, it'll always come back to my name. So
Yeah.
j.dragonette.
Perfect. You set up a system for yourself there.
I did.
Perfect. And hey, if you're thinking about starting a podcast, just in case this is intriguing to you and it's giving you those little butterflies, you can reach out to either one of us for some advice. But I know Jen has a very specific program for entrepreneurs and for people who want to start a podcast, which is great because I think that a major part of like this sort of evolution and awakening that we're in right now, where everybody is sort of like becoming aware of a lot of new things, is the biggest piece of it is that we need to hear from everyone. If you feel like you have a message inside of you, it's probably simply that little inner critic just telling you that nobody wants to hear it. But guess what? We all need to hear. It's like the biggest piece is everybody needs to start speaking their truth, and we
Yep.
all evolve together from the knowledge that you glean. So I know that Jen agrees with me on this
100%.
stuff. All right, I'm gonna click off from live. Thank you again. You guys are the best
Thank
for
you.
joining us if you're still here. And we'll see you in the next episode.